The signal arrived as static, a whisper against the cosmic background. Not the triumphant fanfare of first contact, but a persistent, almost irritating buzz. It took Lena, bless her obsessive algorithms, to recognize the underlying structure. Not random noise, but deliberate, artificial. Now, the room hummed with controlled chaos. Consoles flickered, holographic projections spun, and the air tasted of recycled oxygen and quiet desperation. I, Dr. Aris Thorne, xenolinguist and professional cynic, ran a hand through already disheveled hair. Another week, another false dawn. Usually, it was just stellar flares mimicking patterns. This felt different. Magnification factor holding, Doctor, Lena said, her voice tight with contained excitement. She didn't bother looking up from the cascading data streams. Lena rarely bothered with pleasantries. Results were her currency. Pattern recognition at 98.7%. It's a language. Highly complex, but structured. Not organic, not exactly. Try filtering for prime number sequences. I rasped, my voice roughened by too much recycled air and too little coffee. I hadn't touched the stimulant in 3 days. Didn't seem to make a difference anymore. The universe was indifferent to my caffeine levels. The room fell silent as Lena worked. The holographic projection sharpened, resolving into a series of geometric patterns that shifted and pulsed. Not visual, not exactly. The data translated into a complex harmonic resonance. Something felt more than seen. It's an invitation, Lena finally said, her voice subdued. A notification, really. They're extending an offer. I straightened. An offer? To whom? What kind of offer? Membership. In the League of Worlds, they call it. A flicker of something. Hope, perhaps, quickly smothered, stirred within me. Decades spent deciphering alien radio waves, cataloging linguistic anomalies, all leading to this. First contact. But something in Lena's tone, the precise way she avoided eye contact, told me this wasn't a moment for celebration. Let's see the terms, I said, my hand already reaching for a secure terminal. The translation software churned, spitting out fragmented phrases onto the screen. Compliance requirements, ancestral client status, extended probationary period. The words swam before my eyes, cold and sterile. Client status? I echoed, a knot forming in my stomach. What kind of client? Lena ran a hand over her tablet, bringing up a secondary translation. It's complicated. They refer to it as stewardship, a long-term arrangement. Centuries, millennia, even. I scrolled through the document, the phrases becoming increasingly unsettling. Resource allocation protocols, mandatory technological exchange, adherence to KRYLL directives, KRYLL. A name that resonated with a chilling alienness. How long is this probationary period? I asked, already suspecting the answer. 100,000 years, Lena said, her voice barely a whisper. The room seemed to shrink. A cold dread, not creeping, but solidifying in my bones. 100,000 years. Not a probationary period. A sentence. I reread the phrases, seeking a loophole, a semantic ambiguity. Compliance requirements, ancestral client status. It was airtight. Deliberately so. The language wasn't built for negotiation, but for unwavering adherence. Every phrase, every clause, meticulously constructed to preclude dissent. They want us to be vassals? I asked, the question tasting like ash. Lena hesitated. They present it as a symbiotic relationship. Mutual benefit. But the terms are heavily weighted in their favor. I scrolled further, encountering a section detailing the stewardship responsibilities. Not exploration, not diplomacy, but maintenance. Preservation of KRYLL artifacts. Ancient, enigmatic machines scattered across the galaxy. We'd be caretakers, I said, my voice flat. Servants. For 100,000 years. The holographic projections continued to spin, indifferent to our growing horror. The League of Worlds wasn't an invitation to join a galactic community. It was an offer we couldn't refuse, and a debt we could never repay. The full contract materialized, blooming across the war room's holographic projectors. It wasn't a document, It was a fortress. Every clause, every subclause, nested within layers of impenetrable legal jargon. A monument to bureaucratic cruelty. I ran a hand through my hair, the gesture more reflex than conscious action. It wasn't just the terms, it was the thoroughness. They hadn't left a loophole, a comma out of place. It was as if they'd anticipated every conceivable human argument, every potential attempt at negotiation, and preemptively dismantled it. 100,000 years, Lena stated, her voice devoid of inflection. She was tracing the flow of data with a stylus, her clinical detachment both admirable and unsettling. A client status. Essentially, indentured servitude. Jax grunted, pacing the confined space. Servitude with a smile. They call it stewardship. Romanticizing galactic exploitation. He stopped, staring at the swirling holographic text. What are these artifacts, anyway? The contract is vague. Deliberately so. I scrolled further, focusing on the section detailing our stewardship responsibilities. Ancient machines, scattered across the galaxy, relics of a forgotten age. They weren't described, merely referenced. Maintenance protocols, energy requirements. No schematics, no blueprints. Just a demand for unwavering upkeep. It felt less like a partnership and more like being assigned to tend a landlord's decaying property. An eternity spent polishing brass on a tomb. They want access to the galaxy through us. I murmured, the realization settling like a stone in my stomach. We become their eyes and ears, their maintenance crew. We keep the lights on while they do whatever it is they do. The room's calm panel blared to life, a news feed overriding the sterile silence. Riots erupted in Sao Paulo. Stock markets were collapsing. The UN Security Council chamber was a shouting match. Unprecedented global unrest, widespread panic, governments struggling to maintain order. The automated voice droned. It's spreading, someone said, their voice tight with anxiety. Lena tapped a control, bringing up a direct feed from the KRYLL ambassador's address to the United Nations. A colossal, chitinous figure filled the screen, its multifaceted eyes cold and impassive. Its voice, translated into perfect English, resonated with an unnerving calmness. Understandable apprehension. Be assured, the League of Worlds prioritizes galactic stability. Your compliance ensures your continued viability. Resistance is illogical. Illogical. The word hung in the air, a chilling dismissal of human agency. The KRYLL weren't offering a deal. They were issuing a decree. Jack swore under his breath. They've weaponized bureaucracy, Lena. A contract so airtight, so comprehensive, it's a form of control. They haven't just written the terms of admission, they've written the rules of our existence. I felt a suffocating pressure in my chest. The weight of it pressed down on me, a leaden blanket extinguishing any remaining hope. They hadn't simply anticipated our resistance. They had accounted for it, neutralized it, before we even knew it was coming. The contract wasn't just legally binding. It was psychologically crippling. It wasn't about what we couldn't do. It was about what they'd already prevented us from even considering. I scrolled again, landing on a section detailing the enforcement mechanisms. Not punishment, not war. Simply reassignment. A subtly worded clause about transfer of custodial responsibilities, a polite euphemism for the removal of uncooperative individuals. A quiet disappearance. My gaze drifted to the holographic projection of the contract, a fortress of words. I ran my hand along the cool surface of the console, a chilling realization dawning. This wasn't a path to the stars. It was a gilded cage, and the KRYLL weren't offering us a key. They were simply ensuring the bars were strong enough to hold us for 100,000 years. The assessment tasted like ash. Not a literal taste, of course. It was the metallic tang of dread that coated the back of my throat, the tightening in my chest that mimicked a vice. News feeds scrolling across the periphery of my vision reported escalating protests. Buenos Aires, Cairo, New Delhi, all erupting in the same chorus of outrage and fear. 100,000 years. A dead ode before humanity even stood upright. A meticulously crafted indenture, masked as an invitation. The UN Council chamber hummed with suppressed chaos, the low thrum of translation software a constant, irritating whine. Ambassador Ito, the Japanese representative, remained an island of composure amidst the rising tide of panic. Her face, smooth and unreadable, offered no hint of the storm raging beneath. She turned to me, her dark eyes assessing. "Dr. Thorne," she began, her voice calm, measured. "Your preliminary analysis of the contract is comprehensive. Disturbing, certainly, but comprehensive." I ran a hand through my thinning hair, the gesture feeling instinctively futile. "Disturbing is an understatement, Ambassador. It's a carefully constructed trap. They don't want us in the league. They want us bound." "With all due respect, Doctor," Ito said, a flicker of something akin to weariness crossing her features, "panic will serve no one. We must explore all avenues. The potential benefits of joining the League, access to technology, interstellar trade, are significant." "Significant for them," I countered, my voice rough. "We become caretakers for ancient machines we don't understand, fulfilling the whims of a species that views us as little more than livestock. It's not a partnership, it's feudalism with faster-than-light travel." A heated debate erupted around the table. The Brazilian delegate argued for immediate and unequivocal rejection. The Russian representative proposed a military buildup, a futile gesture against a civilization capable of interstellar travel. The American delegate, predictably, advocated for further study. Empty words. "We've exhausted the diplomatic options," Ito announced, raising a hand to silence the rising clamor. "The Council has reached a compromise. A limited exploratory mission. A fact-finding expedition to assess the KRYLL and their terms firsthand." My gut twisted. A euphemism for sacrifice. "And who, precisely, is volunteering for this mission?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Ito's gaze met mine, unwavering. "You, Dr. Thorne. Your linguistic expertise is invaluable. Your cynicism, while refreshing, will be a necessary counterweight." A wave of exhaustion washed over me. Of course, the one person who understood the full horror of the situation was the one they were sending into the lion's den. "With all due respect, Ambassador," I began, mimicking her tone, "I'm a linguist, not a diplomat. I analyze contracts. I don't sign my life away to them." "The risks are mitigated," Ito countered, her voice devoid of warmth. "The KRYLL have agreed to certain protocols, security measures, and," she paused, her gaze hardening, "the situation demands a degree of pragmatism." I stared at the holographic contract, its intricate clauses shimmering like a spiderweb. 100,000 years. A gilded cage. No escape clauses. No loopholes. Just servitude. Pragmatism, she called it. I called it surrender. "Very well," I said, the words tasting like grit. "I'll lead the mission." I didn't volunteer. I conceded. The hum of the translation software seemed to intensify, a relentless drone in the suffocating silence. The faces around the table blurred, their expressions a mixture of relief and thinly veiled disapproval. I was the one they were sending to negotiate our chains. A slow burn of resolve ignited within me. They wanted an assessment? I'd give them one. An assessment that would shatter their illusions. I just needed to survive long enough to deliver it. The docking clamp hissed, a sound less mechanical than organic. The Ark didn't receive ships, it absorbed them. A shudder ran through the hull of the Icarus, a tremor that felt less like metal fatigue and more like a sigh from a sleeping leviathan. I braced myself, knuckles white against the cold steel of the observation port. Atmosphere nominal. Composition unusual. Anya's voice crackled over the calm, her usual briskness muted. High concentration of what appears to be ionized methane. And something else. A resonant frequency. It's unsettling. Unsettling was an understatement. The airlock cycled, not with a reassuring whoosh of regulated pressure, but with a slow, deliberate expansion, like the breathing of something vast and ancient. The inner door slid open, revealing a corridor that defied geometry. It wasn't built, it grew. Walls pulsed with a faint, internal light, veins of bioluminescence tracing intricate patterns across surfaces that felt spongy under my boots. The air hung thick and heavy, carrying a cloying sweetness that bordered on nauseating. Around me, the team moved with practiced efficiency, despite the palpable tension. Ramirez, ever the pragmatist, ran a diagnostic scan, her face illuminated by the green glow of her handheld device. Manley, his expression resigned, checked the seals on his biosuit. Ito, as always, was an impassive statue, her gaze sweeping across the corridor with a clinical detachment that bordered on unnerving. She hadn't uttered a word since we'd docked. "Report," she finally clipped, her voice echoing slightly in the organic chamber. "Atmosphere breathable, but strange," I replied, forcing myself to focus. "Gravity is 0.8 standard. And the architecture, it's alive. Literally, the corridor wasn't straight. It curved and twisted, as if following the path of some internal organ. The walls weren't smooth. They rippled and contracted with a slow, rhythmic pulse. It wasn't light that illuminated the passage, but the walls themselves, radiating a soft, cerulean glow. The effect was mesmerizing, but deeply unsettling. A primal alertness had begun to coil in my chest, constricting my breathing. I found myself scanning the walls, searching for something. A pattern, a threat, anything to explain the creeping sense of wrongness. "The structure appears to be grown, rather than built," Ramirez announced, her voice a hushed wonder. "The composition is primarily chitin and a complex organic polymer I can't identify. It's incredibly resilient." We continued deeper into the arc, each step sinking slightly into the spongy floor. The rhythmic pulsing of the walls intensified, synchronizing with the beat of my own heart. The air grew heavier, the sweet scent more cloying. I could feel a subtle vibration through the soles of my boots, a resonant frequency that seemed to penetrate my very bones. "They've adapted the internal environment to their physiology," I murmured, more to myself than to the team. "This isn't a ship, it's an extension of them." Ahead, the corridor opened into a vast chamber, a cavernous space dominated by a colossal structure that resembled a pulsating heart. Veins of bioluminescence crisscrossed its surface, casting eerie shadows across the chamber. The air thrummed with energy, a palpable force that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. "Our destination," Ito stated, her voice devoid of inflection. "The harmonic resonator. The resonator. The key to our indentured servitude. And, I suspected, the key to understanding just how deeply we'd been ensnared." As we approached the colossal structure, a figure materialized from the shadows, a KRYLL. It wasn't what I expected. The images we'd received had been sanitized. The reality was far more alien, more terrifying. It resembled a praying mantis crossed with a whale, a colossal, bioengineered being with iridescent skin and multifaceted eyes that seemed to absorb all light. It regarded us with an ancient, impassive gaze. A silent assessment. A judgment. I felt a shiver run down my spine. We weren't explorers here. We were specimens. And the Ark wasn't a vessel. It was a cage. The chamber throbbed. Not with sound, exactly, but with resonance. The harmonic resonator dominated the space, a colossal structure of woven energy filaments and pulsating chambers. Veins of blue-white light traced its contours, casting eerie shadows that danced with the rhythmic expansion and contraction of its core. It wasn't merely a machine, it felt organic, like a living heart powering the Ark. "The primary interface is obscured," Ito stated, her voice clipped and professional. She ran a diagnostic scanner over a panel riddled with ports, each radiating a faint heat signature. Multiple layers of redundant shielding. Inefficient. Deliberately so. Davis, ever the pragmatist, was already mapping the energy flow with a handheld device. "Power draw is astronomical. Whatever this thing regulates, it requires a phenomenal amount of energy. And look at the tolerances. Subatomic precision. This isn't engineering. It's biosculpting." I approached a port, hesitantly extending a gloved hand. The surface was warm, almost feverish. As my fingers neared, a field of static crackled around the opening, raising the hairs on my arm. The sensation wasn't unpleasant, just unsettling. Documentation is limited, I said, carefully choosing my words. The KRYLL had provided a data packet, ostensibly detailing the resonator's function. It was a collection of diagrams so abstract, so divorced from any recognizable engineering principle, it was useless. Worse, crucial sections were simply missing. Limited is an understatement. Ito corrected, without looking up. It's as if they anticipated we wouldn't understand, and therefore didn't bother to explain. The KRYLL observing us, the same colossal, insectoid being from the arrival chamber, shifted slightly, its multifaceted eyes reflecting the pulsating light. It hadn't spoken since we'd entered, hadn't offered any assistance. Just observation. They claim it's too complex for human comprehension, I said, my voice tight. I deliberately avoided looking at the KRYLL, focusing instead on the scanner's readings. The data was fragmented, contradictory. It felt like deliberate obfuscation, that the resonator operates on principles beyond our current understanding. Davis snorted. A convenient excuse for inadequate documentation. They want us to fumble, to break something. I'd bet my commission on it. My jaw clenched. It wasn't just the lack of information, it was the way it was presented. A deliberate layering of complexity, a systematic obscuring of vital details. It wasn't ignorance, it was calculated interference. The energy signature fluctuates wildly, I announced, my voice clipped. It's not maintaining a stable baseline. This thing is barely contained. The KRYLL finally spoke, its voice a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the chamber. Stability is maintained. With what? I retorted, before I could stop myself. Wishful thinking? The readings indicate significant energy leakage. The KRYLL didn't respond immediately. It tilted its head, a slow, deliberate movement that felt like an assessment. Human interpretation is often flawed. The scanner is calibrated to detect subatomic particle decay. I'm not misinterpreting a flickering light bulb. I ran my hand along the metallic casing of the resonator, feeling a faint vibration beneath my fingers. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. This wasn't a machine to be maintained. It was a trap. The chime echoed, a crystalline tone that sliced through the low hum of the harmonic resonator. Sector Gamma 9 check complete. Nominal. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. Another cycle complete, another handful of hours surrendered to this gilded cage. Nominal. Everything was always nominal, according to the KRYLL. The cool conduit beneath my fingers vibrated faintly, a tremor I'd learned to anticipate. It wasn't a malfunction, not exactly. More like a deep, resonant sigh from the arc itself. This place wasn't built, it grew. Organic structures woven with impossible alloys, pulsating with an internal life I couldn't comprehend. The floral scent, initially soothing, now felt cloying, a deliberate masking of something ancient and alien. Lena's voice, clipped and pragmatic, cut through my thoughts. Resonator core temperature holding steady. Energy flow within acceptable parameters. Still no access to the diagnostic logs. They're deliberately restricting us, Javier muttered, his knuckles white as he tightened a coupling, saying the interface is too complex for human cognition. It's insulting. I clenched my fist, resisting the urge to slam it against the polished chrome of the resonator housing. It's not complexity, it's control. They want us troubleshooting symptoms, not finding causes. Lena didn't bother with platitudes. Let's not sugarcoat it. They're ensuring we remain dependent. She glanced towards the observation platform, a tiered structure of woven organic material where a KRYLL figure stood motionless, its multifaceted eyes reflecting the green glow of the resonator. Always watching. The sensation prickled at the back of my neck. It wasn't the seeing that bothered me. It was the feeling of being assessed, like insects pinned under a microscope. They weren't interested in our competence, but our compliance. The energy bleed in Sector Delta 4 is increasing, Javier announced, his voice tight. It's subtle, but it's there. Nominal. A voice resonated from above. The KRYLL hadn't even looked at the readings. It simply stated the conclusion it expected. I bit back a retort. Arguing was pointless. They didn't respond to logic, only obedience. I'm rerouting auxiliary power to Delta 4, I said, my voice carefully neutral, attempting to stabilize the flow. Efficient, the KRYLL responded, the single word devoid of inflection. I ran diagnostics, my fingers flying across the console. The bleed was indeed subtle, masked by the resonator's complex energy matrix. But it was growing. And the source, it wasn't a mechanical failure. It was an intentional diversion of energy, siphoned off to an unknown location. They're taking more than they let on, I murmured, my gaze fixed on the cascading data streams. This isn't about maintaining stability, it's about harvesting power. Javier's face was grim. You think they're draining energy from somewhere else? The thought sent a chill down my spine. The KRYLL hadn't explained the purpose of the resonator, only its function. We were caretakers, not scientists. Tools, not thinkers. I risked a glance upwards. The KRYLL hadn't moved. It simply stood there, observing us, its elongated limbs perfectly still. A faint bioluminescence pulsed beneath its chitinous exoskeleton. A slow, suffocating dread began to creep into my mind. It wasn't simply that we were watched. It was the unsettling feeling that we were understood and deemed insignificant. Resonator function remains nominal, the KRYLL intoned, its voice echoing through the chamber. Continue your assigned tasks. I forced myself to breathe. Nominal. A lie, wrapped in a cage of impossible technology. And we were the ones polishing the bars. The fracturing wasn't a sound, not exactly. It was a visual corruption, a cascade of emerald and crimson bleeding across the harmonic matrix projected onto the chamber wall. The usually stable flow of energy devolved into a chaotic rainbow, like oil slicked across water. My gut tightened, a cold knot forming beneath my ribs. Javier swore under his breath, his fingers flying across his console. Resonator core instability increasing. Containment fields at 80%. His voice was tight, clipped. I didn't need the readouts. The air itself thrummed with wrongness, a discordant vibration that resonated deep within my bones. The chamber's soft, ethereal glow flickered, threatened by the escalating energy fluctuations. Above us, the KRYLL remained motionless, its multifaceted eyes reflecting the chaotic display like cold, distant stars. It hadn't offered assistance, hadn't even acknowledged the escalating crisis beyond the initial, detached assessment delivered hours ago. What's the primary driver? I asked, forcing the question out, even though I suspected the answer. The KRYLL's deliberately obscured documentation. The simplifications they'd insisted upon. Lena, her face pale and streaked with sweat, shook her head. I'm trying to isolate the fault, but the diagnostic protocols are incomplete. It's like they want us to stumble around in the dark. My jaw clenched. It wasn't incompetence. It was deliberate obstruction. I intended to prove that, even if it was the last thing I did. Containment at 70%. Javier's voice rose in pitch. We're losing structural integrity in Sector 4. Override the automated sequence. I ordered, my voice raspy. Initiate manual recalibration. Bypass the safety protocols. A beat of hesitation. Sir, that's risky. The resonator's energy output is unpredictable. We could overload the system. We're out of time, Sergeant. Do it. Lena's fingers danced across her console, rerouting power flows, engaging emergency dampers. She argued quickly with Javier, pointing out that they were violating at least 3 KRYLL safety directives. Javier, clearly unhappy, complied. Manual override engaged, he reported, his voice strained. But the energy signature, it's spiking. I'm losing control. The chamber shuddered violently, throwing several technicians off their feet. Emergency klaxons wailed, a shrill counterpoint to the escalating hum of the resonator. Above, the KRYLL remained a silent, impassive observer, its elongated limbs perfectly still. It wasn't simply ignoring us. It was studying us, judging us. I gripped the edge of my console, my knuckles white. The projected harmonic matrix dissolved into a swirling vortex of raw energy, threatening to overwhelm the containment fields entirely. Sweat stung my eyes. I needed to understand what was happening, but the fragmented data streams provided little clarity. The KRYLL hadn't offered assistance, hadn't even offered a damn explanation. They just watched. I'm rerouting the primary flux capacitor, Lena shouted over the din, but the energy bleed is too high. We need to stabilize the containment matrix before it collapses. Try dampening the tachyon emitters, Javier called back, his voice tight with desperation. I forced myself to breathe, to focus. The KRYLL weren't interested in maintaining stability. They were testing us, probing our capabilities, measuring our reactions. This wasn't about the resonator. It was about control. They wanted to see how we would respond under pressure, how far we would push ourselves to avoid failure. They wanted to see if we were worthy of their patronage. I slammed my fist on a console, overriding a final safety lock. A surge of power coursed through the system, momentarily stabilizing the harmonic matrix. But the respite was fleeting. The energy fluctuations resumed, even more violent than before. It's no use, Lena cried, her voice laced with panic. The containment fields are failing. We're going to overload. I stared up at the KRYLL, my gaze unwavering. Its multifaceted eyes blinked slowly, a deliberate, calculated gesture. It wasn't concerned. It wasn't even surprised. It was simply waiting. The access panel wasn't meant to be there. I'd traced the energy conduits, looking for a variance, a surge point indicating the source of the harmonic instability, and my hand had brushed against a section of the casing that gave slightly under pressure. No seam, no visible lock, just a subtle yielding, as if the metal itself had breathed inward. Javier, sweat plastering his dark hair to his forehead, held the emergency floodlights while Lena frantically rerouted power to compensate for the escalating fluctuations. Each tremor sent a fresh wave of nausea rolling through me. What is it, Ravi? Lena's voice was stretched thin. The console screamed warnings in crimson. I don't know. The panel slid inward with a sigh of displaced air, revealing a small alcove, crammed with crystalline data storage units unlike anything I'd ever seen. They pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence, bathed in an ethereal blue light. It felt wrong. This wasn't part of the resonator's functional architecture. This was something hidden, deliberately concealed. Javier swore under his breath. Another KRYLL quirk? Just what we need. I activated my scanner, but the readings were fragmented, chaotic. The data was encrypted with a sophistication that dwarfed anything in our databases. It took a full 10 minutes, bypassing layers of security protocols, to establish a rudimentary connection. The first images flickered onto my visor, a starfield, then a planet, a vibrant, teeming world, lush with vegetation. Then, the image fractured, warped, and faded to grayscale. What was that? Lena asked, her voice barely audible above the whine of straining power conduits. I ignored her, my focus locked on the emerging data stream. The glyphs were complex, alien, but my linguistic algorithms slowly began to unravel them. The translation, when it came, was a punch to the gut. Not a technical manual. Not a schematic. History. It's a chronicle. I breathed, the words catching in my throat. A record of the KRYLL. Their origins. The images shifted. Now, scenes of conquest. Not of glorious battles, but of systematic exploitation. Worlds stripped bare, their resources devoured. Civilizations collapsing, reduced to dust. A crimson sky choked with ash, the ghostly outlines of lost cities. My stomach clenched. It wasn't just resource extraction, it was total consumption. Everything was taken, leaving behind lifeless husks. What are you seeing, Ravi? Javier demanded, his voice sharp with urgency. They didn't uplift species, I said, the words tasting like bile. They harvested them, seeded life across galaxies, then systematically drained their planets, their energy, their very essence. Lena gasped. You're saying, the harmonic resonator. It's not regulating energy, Lena. It's collecting it. The data stream accelerated, painting a terrifying picture of a galactic network of these devices, siphoning power from countless worlds. The client status wasn't a path to advancement. It was perpetual servitude, a role in their vast, cosmic harvesting operation. The images blurred again, shifting to a different era. The KRYLL themselves, not as the majestic bioengineered beings we'd encountered, but as something smaller, more fragile. Driven by desperation, they'd scoured the galaxy for a solution to a dying star. They hadn't sought symbiosis, they demanded tribute. They didn't become superior, I muttered, the realization dawning with sickening clarity. They forced others to make them that way. Javier ran a hand through his hair. So, the League of Worlds, it's a farm. The console blared a new warning, a cascade failure in the containment fields. The resonator's harmonic matrix was on the verge of collapse, but I barely registered it. My eyes were locked on the final images, depictions of other clients, faces etched with despair, their worlds reduced to barren wastelands. A cold dread washed over me, heavier than any physical weight. I glanced up, instinctively seeking the KRL's gaze. It stood motionless, observing us, its multifaceted eyes reflecting the flickering emergency lights. There was no surprise, no anger, just calculation. It hadn't tried to stop me. It hadn't even attempted to conceal this archive. It had allowed me to find it. A prickling sensation ran down my spine. The KRYL wasn't reacting to our discovery. It was measuring our response. And in its impassive gaze, I saw not a threat, but a patient, predatory satisfaction. We weren't trying to join a League of Worlds. We were being assessed for our suitability as livestock. The tremor in my hands wouldn't quite settle. It wasn't fear, not exactly. More, a cold, burning fury. Around me, the others mirrored the suppressed rage, the dawning, desperate resolve etched onto their faces. Lena's knuckles were white as she gripped the edge of her console. Jackson's jaw was clenched, his gaze fixed on the holographic schematics, a muscle ticking in his temple. Maya, ever the observer, simply stared at the pulsing core of the harmonic resonator, her expression unreadable, but her posture radiating contained energy. We've seen how they operate, Jackson finally rasped, his voice a low growl that barely carried over the hum of the machinery. He didn't need to elaborate. The archive had shown us everything. Generations of clients bled dry, worlds reduced to husks, entire civilizations serving as fuel for the KRL's insatiable expansion. It wasn't a League of Worlds. It was a meticulously crafted feeding ground. So, we disrupt the feed, Lena stated, her voice crisp and efficient. Subtle alterations to the resonator's harmonic matrix. Introduce fluctuations the KRYL will attribute to system drift. Enough to slow them down, buy us time. Subtlety is key, Maya added, her fingers flying across a keyboard. We can manipulate the environmental controls, lower the efficiency of the energy transfer. A few percentage points here, a few there. They won't notice immediately. I nodded, my throat tight. The documentation, it's deliberately obfuscated. They want us to stumble, to make mistakes. Let's give them a different kind of mistake. The air thrummed with a shared, unspoken purpose. We moved with a practiced coordination born of months spent maintaining this monstrous machine. I bypassed the primary control locks, rerouting diagnostic feeds. Lena began subtly altering the algorithms governing energy flow, introducing controlled anomalies. Jackson, leveraging his experience with antiquated reactor systems, focused on degrading the resonator's containment fields, not to cause a catastrophic failure, but to increase energy leakage. My hands danced across the console, inputting a complex sequence of commands. It felt exhilarating, this act of defiance. A small spark of hope igniting in the oppressive darkness of the Ark. Careful, I murmured, monitoring the energy signatures. We're pushing the limits. Don't want to trigger a containment breach. Lena's response was terse. I'm aware. Hours blurred into a tense, silent ballet. We worked with a deft touch, masking our alterations within the normal fluctuations of the system. It was a delicate dance, a constant balancing act between disruption and detection. Then, a flicker on my monitor. A secondary surveillance feed, focusing on our sector. A KRYLL security drone, its multifaceted eyes gleaming. "We have company," I warned, my voice tight. "Drone in Sector Gamma 9. Jackson swore under his breath. "Tighten the masking protocols. Maya, divert the drone's sensors with a false thermal signature." Maya's fingers flew across her keyboard, weaving a complex illusion. The drone paused, its sensors momentarily confused, then resumed its patrol. "It bought us a few minutes," she said, her voice strained. "But they're getting suspicious." Increased sensor sweeps across the entire level. The air crackled with tension. We continued our work, faster now, more reckless. The KRLL surveillance was tightening, the net closing around us. Another alert flashed on my console. Containment field degradation detected. Minor fluctuations in harmonic resonance. The KRYLL hadn't discovered our sabotage, not exactly. But they were noticing something was amiss. "They're running diagnostics," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Prepare for a full system check." This was it. The moment of truth. We'd planted the seeds of disruption. Now, we had to wait and see if they would grow, or if we would be crushed beneath the weight of the KRLL's wrath. The shift in the ARC's internal hum wasn't a change, but a fracture. A resonant frequency, previously a soothing thrum against bone, now vibrated with discordant energy. Like a tuning fork struck against bone, it resonated in my teeth. Alarms, not sirens but modulated clicks and whistles, layered over the hum, escalating the pressure in my chest. We were cornered. The maintenance levels access corridor, normally spacious enough for 3 KRYLL to pass abreast, felt like a closing trap. Behind us, the corridor dissolved into the pulsing, organic architecture of the Arkansas ahead. Blocking our only exit stood 5 KRYLL. They weren't rushing us, hadn't even broken from their gliding, impossibly fluid movements. It was the lack of urgency that chilled me more than any display of force. Each KRYLL stood at least 3 meters tall, segmented bodies gleaming with iridescent chitin. Their multifaceted eyes, black as a starless night, assessed us with cold, clinical detachment. The clicking of mandibles, a staccato rhythm against the hum, was deliberate. It wasn't a sign of agitation, but a measure of their control. "We can explain," I said, my voice sounding thin even to my own ears. I forced myself to meet the gaze of the lead KRYLL, a particularly large specimen whose carapace bore intricate, geometric patterns. The KRYLL didn't respond immediately. It tilted its head, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a shiver down my spine. The clicking of mandibles intensified, then ceased. "Explanation is unnecessary," it finally said, the voice a chorus of rasping clicks and modulated tones that somehow translated into understandable language. "Our sensors have recorded a series of unauthorized modifications to the harmonic resonator's tertiary conduits. A clear breach of Contract 7.2 subsection Delta. We were performing routine maintenance," Maya said, her voice tight, a tremor running through her fingers as she gripped her datapad. She usually kept her fear concealed, but not now. The flickering light caught the sheen of sweat on her forehead. "Routine maintenance does not include the installation of bypass circuits," the KRYLL said, its voice devoid of inflection. "Nor does it encompass the manipulation of energy flow regulators. These actions constitute sabotage." The clicking of mandibles resumed, slow and measured. "Sabotage is a strong word," David offered, his attempt at diplomacy sounding weak even to me. "We discovered anomalies and were attempting to correct them." "Correct them without authorization?" The KRYLL's head tilted again. "That is illogical. Your allotted tasks are clearly defined. Any deviation is considered a violation." "We believed we were acting in the ARC's best interest," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "We detected instability." "Instability is managed," the KRYLL said, dismissing my claim with a wave of a segmented limb. "Your function is to maintain, not to evaluate." The Ark's operational parameters are beyond your comprehension. It paused, then added, however, acknowledging the irregularity of your actions is depreciated. It demonstrates a rudimentary understanding of your contractual obligations. So what now? Asked Anya, her voice barely a whisper. The KRWL's gaze swept over us, a silent assessment. A reallocation of resources is required. Your current skill set appears insufficient for the demands of your position. We will implement a more rigorous training program. The phrase hung in the air, heavy with unspoken threat. It wasn't a promise of education, but a veiled declaration of control. A systematic dismantling of our skills, our knowledge, our very will. This program will consist of intensive simulations. The KRYL continued, the clicking of mandibles now a relentless, driving rhythm. Designed to reinforce the importance of adherence to protocol and the consequences of noncompliance. Its gaze locked onto mine. Consider it an opportunity for advancement, or a clarification of your limitations. The access hatch hissed open, revealing not the sterile gray of a human airlock, but a pulsating, obsidian membrane. It felt wrong, not mechanically faulty, but fundamentally alien. The scout vessel wasn't built, it was grown. Intuitive controls yielded to the lightest touch, yet unsettling. Every surface resonated with a low thrum, as if the ship itself were breathing. Comms are jammed. They anticipated this, Anya reported, her fingers flying across the console. But the emergency beacon. I've rerouted it through a tertiary array. It'll be weak, a ghost signal, but it's all we've got. Ben, a former aerospace engineer, didn't nod, but his jaw tightened, a muscle ticking near his ear. He was already running diagnostics on the vessel's limited armament, 2 pulse cannons, pitifully small against the bulk of a KRYL warship. Shields are at 70%. Enough for a few glancing blows. Ravi didn't bother with reassurances. Hope felt brittle tonight. Let's move. Now. The scout vessel slipped from the Ark's shadow, a silver dart against the sprawling, organic darkness. Alarms blared within the Ark, a chorus of resonating clicks and guttural tones that vibrated through the hull of the escaping ship. Then, the pursuit began. 3 KRYL fighters, bioluminescent and shaped like manta rays, materialized from the inky blackness. They didn't move so much as flow, their bodies warping the light around them. Pulse cannon fire lanced out, narrowly missing the scout vessel's shields. The ship shuddered, protesting the impact. Evasive maneuvers. Ravi barked, wrenching the controls. The ship responded instantly, twisting and turning with impossible agility. It felt less like flying a vessel and more like riding a living creature. The KRYL fighters were relentless, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Anya worked furiously, attempting to disrupt their targeting systems. Their lock-on is adaptive. Every time I break the connection, it rebuilds faster. Ravi steered the scout vessel towards an asteroid field, a chaotic swirl of rock and ice. It was a gamble. The field offered cover, but it was also a graveyard for careless pilots. Brace for impact. The ship plunged into the asteroid field, weaving between the massive rocks with breathtaking precision. The asteroid's surface is blurred, close enough to scrape the hull. A glancing blow sent the ship spinning, alarms screaming. Ben fought to regain control, his knuckles white on the yoke. Shields are down to 40%. Anya shouted over the din. Ravi targeted a cluster of asteroids, activating the ship's limited defensive weaponry. The pulse cannons fired, shattering the rocks into dust and debris, creating a temporary screen. It wasn't enough to stop the KRYL fighters, but it bought them a few precious seconds. They're flanking us, Ben yelled, pointing to the view screen. 2 KRYL fighters were maneuvering into position, their bioluminescent bodies glowing menacingly. Ravi executed a daring maneuver, a tight spiral that brought the scout vessel crashing through a narrow gap between 2 asteroids. The KRYL fighters, caught off guard, were forced to break off their attack. But the respite was brief. One of the fighters unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, striking the scout vessel's engine housing. The ship lurched violently, sparks erupting from the damaged systems. Engines are failing, Anya cried. We're losing altitude. Ravi scanned the surrounding space, desperate for an escape route. Below, a desolate, rocky planet loomed, its surface scarred by ancient impacts. It was a long shot, but it was their only hope. Prepare for emergency landing, he commanded, bracing himself for the inevitable impact. The ship descended rapidly, its battered hull groaning under the strain. The planet's surface rushed up to meet them. The scout vessel slammed into the rock, metal screeching against stone, throwing everyone forward. Then, darkness. A ringing silence, broken only by the hiss of escaping atmosphere. The silence was the first thing that registered, a heavy weight pressing against my eardrums. Not the vacuum of space, but a terrestrial quiet, unsettling in its completeness. The taste of blood coated my tongue, metallic and familiar. I pushed myself up, a jolt of pain radiating from my left arm. Fractured, probably. Anya was stirring beside me, groaning softly. Malik was still unconscious, pinned beneath a section of the collapsed console. Anya, you all right? She blinked, her vision slowly focusing. Head, feels like it's been kicked. What happened? We crashed. Emergency landing wasn't exactly gentle. I ignored the throbbing in my arm and began to assess the damage. The scout ship was a wreck, its hull breached in multiple places. The engine housing was a twisted mess of metal and wiring. Hope of sending a distress call dwindled with each passing second. Malik, Anya scrambled over, trying to lift the debris. He's breathing, but we need to get him out. We worked frantically, ignoring our own injuries. The air was thin, dry, and carried a faint, acrid smell. Finally, we managed to free Malik. He was pale and disoriented, but alive. What happened? He mumbled, clutching his head. We're down, I said grimly. Looks like we're stranded. The planet itself was desolate, a vast expanse of red sand and jagged rock formations. The sky was a bruised purple, dominated by two pale, orbiting moons. But it wasn't the barren landscape that caught my attention. It was the structure. Half buried in the sand, a kilometer from the wreckage, stood a colossal edifice of black stone. Its architecture was unlike anything I'd ever seen, a strange blend of geometric precision and organic curves. It radiated an aura of immense age and power. What is that place? Anya breathed, her voice hushed. I activated my scanner, but it returned only static. Some kind of building, ancient, judging by the decay. But there's something else. A faint, rhythmic pulse emanated from the structure, barely perceptible at first, then growing stronger. It resonated through the ground, vibrating in my bones. Do you feel that? Malik asked, his eyes wide. It's a signal, I said, my mind racing. A complex one. Not natural. We cautiously approached the structure, the rhythmic pulse growing louder with each step. The stone was cool to the touch, covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shift and writhe before our eyes. Inside, the structure was even more bizarre. Vast chambers opened into each other, filled with strange machinery and pulsating energy fields. The air hummed with an almost unbearable intensity. This isn't KRYLL technology, I said, my voice barely a whisper. It's older, much older. The signal was strongest in the central chamber, originating from a massive crystalline device at the heart of the structure. As I approached, images flooded my mind. A civilization thriving, building, reaching for the stars. Then war, destruction, and finally, silence. They fought the KRYLL. I realized, a chilling premonition washing over me. This wasn't just a civilization. It was a resistance. The crystalline device pulsed with renewed energy, and the signal resolved itself into a coherent stream of data. I connected my scanner, and the information began to download. It was a schematic, a blueprint, for disrupting the harmonic resonance. This is incredible, I stammered, my heart pounding in my chest. They found a way to interfere with the KRYLL's energy siphon, a way to weaken their control. Anya stared at me, her eyes filled with hope. You mean, we might actually have a chance? The vast, empty void beyond the structure's walls suddenly felt less daunting. The weight of our situation hadn't lessened, but a flicker of defiance ignited within me. We were stranded, wounded, and hopelessly outnumbered. But we weren't helpless. We had a weapon, and we were going to use it. The schematic swam before my eyes, overlaid on the reality of twisting conduits and humming crystals. Anya's fingers danced across a console, rerouting power flows with a speed born of desperation. Tiberius grunted with each tightened bolt, his brow slick with sweat. Zara, a whirlwind of flying fingers, was recalibrating the phase harmonizers, muttering corrections in rapid-fire bursts. Almost there, she snapped, not looking up. The energy bleed is spiking. We're pushing the limits of the shielding. The air crackled with static. A low thrum resonated through the shuttle's hull, vibrating in my teeth. This wasn't just engineering, it was a violation. We were forcing a foreign signal into a system designed to maintain absolute harmonic stability, a system the KRYLL had perfected over millennia. The final node is online, Anya announced, her voice tight with concentration. Initiating the disruption sequence. A surge of violet light flooded the chamber. The crystalline structure pulsed with renewed intensity, the elegant geometric patterns distorting, fracturing. My breath caught in my throat. The schematic on my visor flickered, confirming the signal was propagating, a counter-resonance, designed to unravel the KRLL's energy siphon. Hours blurred into a montage of frantic adjustments, near failures, and shared exhaustion. We fought to maintain containment, to prevent the disruption from collapsing inward and vaporizing us all. Zara's quick rebuttals to my suggestions were less argumentative now, more a shared language of precision under duress. Tiberius, usually taciturn, offered concise, invaluable insights. Then a shift. A tremor ran through the structure, deeper, more violent than before. The violet light intensified, then fractured into a chaotic spray of emerald and ruby. The humming deepened into a resonant groan, a death cry of displaced energy. It's working, I breathed, a thrill of exhilaration surging through me. The siphon, it's destabilizing. But the instability wasn't contained. The crystalline structure, once a beacon of elegant power, began to come apart. Sections fractured, shedding shimmering fragments into the void. Support struts twisted and buckled. The Ark, the immense KRYLL vessel to which this structure was linked, shuddered violently. Report. I barked, my voice strained. Shields are failing. Anya yelled over the rising din, structural integrity compromised in sections Delta and Epsilon. We're losing containment. Zara shouted. The energy surge it's cascading. The Ark was literally coming apart at the seams. Vast sections of the ship peeled away, spinning into the blackness, trailing ribbons of dissipating energy. The disruption wasn't just weakening the siphon, it was tearing the entire vessel apart. They're retreating, Tiberius growled, pointing to sensor readings. KRYLL fighters are breaking formation. They're abandoning the Ark. I stared at the receding blips on the screen, a grim satisfaction rising within me. We'd struck a blow. We'd forced the KRYLL to flee. But at what cost? The Ark continued to disintegrate, a vast, dying monument to KRYLL ambition. Debris fields expanded exponentially, creating a swirling maelstrom of shattered metal and dissipating energy. The sheer scale of the destruction was awe-inspiring. Slowly, the chaos subsided. The tremors lessened. The blinding light dimmed. The Ark, or what remained of it, hung suspended in the void, a fragmented ruin. Anya turned to me, her face streaked with grime, her eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and wonder. We did it, she whispered. I looked out at the devastation, at the fragments of a galactic empire scattered across the void. The ripple effect of this disruption would be felt across countless worlds, freeing countless enslaved species. The KRYLL's network, so carefully constructed over millennia, was fractured, weakened. But the work wasn't over. This was just a beginning. A flicker of hope ignited within me, fragile, tentative. We'd struck a blow against a seemingly insurmountable enemy. We'd proven that resistance was possible, but the vastness of the challenge still loomed before us, a dark and daunting expanse. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the KRYLL would not forget.